Grip of Ancient Evil is the eighth full-length album from Sweden-based death metal band Entrails. These folks, they were around back in 1990, but there isn't a lot of documentation of that, and they haven't really offered any old recordings, or I'm sure they have archives of riffs and things that they've used for albums, but nobody had really heard of this band and really talked about them until about when their first couple demos came out in 2009 or so, and people were really looking for that kind of thing at the time, and they fit that old school sound, and they were quite good at it, and they got signed pretty quickly. So I guess the thing I would say about the band early on is that when they put out a couple records for FDA, they really were what people were looking for at the time, which was classic Swedish death metal. And, bands like Horrendous and all that were popular at the time. And this was a band that kind of got it right out the gates and had the right sound. The Tomb Awaits was probably more popular among my friend group at the time who were talking about this stuff. But those were pretty standard Swedish death metal records. A little bit revisionist in some sense, but it's dismember worship done well. And I think that while they had most of that original crew available for those first several records, it was a solid band. I liked Obliteration quite a bit more than most people did, and I kind of emphasize that here, that not everyone loved what Entrails were doing back in the mid 2010s, but it was a Metal Blade release, and it had some hype behind it, but I was kind of the one championing it at the time. Some people might remember that. It was 10 years ago. That was kind of the last time I connected with any of the band's releases. Some of them have been outright bad over the years, and this one is actually a pretty good one, this eighth time around, and this comes off of a streak of pretty awful records from my point of view. This one does a little bit of death and roll, a little bit of melodic death metal, and generally represents Swedish death metal quite well. So let's cut to a clip, and then I'll talk just a little bit more about why I was entertained by this record. I feel like Entrails were formed with nostalgia for something that they weren't really a part of, and by putting out 8 albums, they've kind of proven that they kind of had the idea, and they've been able to run with it through getting noticed at the right time. And they're actually pretty solid band live from what I've heard. It's the lineup changes constantly and all that. I don't really care about all that, but here, what really stood out to me about this record up front was not only that there were a couple of memorable songs on here, but that the sound of this record wasn't trying to out extreme the classic Swedish death metal sound. And what I mean is that they pulled it back to the raw underground garage level stuff and made a terrible sounding death metal record that really suits the style, that really suits the way that Swedish death metal always sounded. It was not perfect. It was done in a way that was kind of cheap, actually. That's where a lot of the spirit of it lives and breathes, and I think that they've gotten that part of it right in terms of just the record sounding like it was produced from the era where that really birthed the idea. We do get, like I said, some death and roll here. We get some Dismember-esque melodic death metal pieces, and I mentioned some other bands and references in the review, but generally we get a good example of all the things that are entertaining about the Boss HM2 directed guitar sound put into a lot of different song types, and creating kind of horrified death metal, morbid stuff that is dark and shambling and has some melodic value that adds to the atmosphere of it all. I don't know that this is the perfect ideation for old school Swedish death metal. I don't really want that from a record anymore. We've gotten it 1,000 times over. It's not going to blow your mind, I don't think, but there are a couple moments that really stand out enough to where I felt like it was worth revisiting and reviewing ultimately. See if that lines up with your taste. Go ahead and check it out now. It's been out for a while. And go ahead and read my written review for more of my thoughts.